welcome everyone to the Montana Book Festival, and you are in the presentation on freelance writing. So if you think you're supposed to be somewhere else, leave. But I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Chelsea Agro. So,
thank you. Thanks. Thank you all for coming today. It's such a pleasure to share the morning in this sort of environment. Just a little bit about myself. I am the editor of Missoula Valley Lifestyle magazine, and we are just launching the Flathead Valley Lifestyle with the November issue coming up. And while I have a journalistic background, I also kind of come from a book background as well, and since we're here at the book festival, I'll be kind of talking about that too. I worked at William Morris Endeavor, which is a huge literary agency in all across the world actually, and I was a junior agent there, so I'll kind of talk about how journalism and freelance writing can actually kind of morph into, if there's some people out there that want to write a book or whatever you want to do with your writing career, it's all kind of interconnected. So just kind of jump into the journalistic perspective first. I think all writing is practicing the craft. So if you're, just coming into, hey, I want to start freelancing and maybe land some articles in local publications, or you want to freelance, for the Washington Post, New York Times, that's like the kind of goal you have for yourself. All of it is going to be a practice in the craft. Even if you're a blogger, anything can turn into a writing career. For me, I'm just going to talk from personal experience. I knew before I even went to college that I wanted to have a career in writing. So, and particularly in books, I want to be an author. But I really loved journalism. So, and I, at the time, thought that that was the only way that you could make money writing, which is definitely false for anybody who does believe that. So I was like, okay, I can either be an English teacher or a journalist. Great, I'll go for journalism. And I just feel like from a journalistic perspective, you start off with things that you love. And I couldn't help but notice that the people that were wanting to publish my work were stories that I had included myself in it. So from an I perspective, or not even from an I perspective, just pulling in things from my own life that kind of gave the story quality, if that makes sense. I'll kind of give you an example. As an editor, when I'm assigning stories to people who don't necessarily have an idea of their own, like they didn't meet somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, I really want to write about this person, they have such a cool business, like they're coming to me with a query. That actually is about 5% of the people I feel like that I publish. Most of them just want a task, they want to be able to go out, have somebody tell them what to write on, they want to go out, interview that person, and then write it and submit it. So when I'm thinking about, from a community perspective, a lot of our stories include new businesses, interesting people around town, and new businesses. I wish there was another better way to put this, but sometimes the material itself can be a little lackluster. Could be deemed as boring, a new dentist opening up or a new medical facility. So it's kind of interesting because when I do have a story that I know is going to take a little bit more finesse, I guess, in writing to make it interesting, I will actually give those stories to my best writers. And I know at some point in their thinking process, they're going to be like, I can't believe this editor is giving me this, sorry for lack of a better word, but this crap story. Why am I writing about a dentist in town? But it's actually kind of a compliment coming from an editor because I know that they're going to be able to take that kind of mundane subject matter and make it something really beautiful. So just to further that, they're going to interview this dentist, they're going to look around, they might see a picture of them and their family on their desk, and they're going to ask those questions. They're going to ask, about their family. They're going to get into the subject matter. And that story, while it's going to be about this new dentist opening up in town, and yeah, you should definitely go. They're going to have all your standard dental needs. They're also going to talk about how maybe this husband and wife opened up this business and maybe they had to sleep in their car in Missoula for a month while they got this business off the ground. And before you know it, the story becomes about the American dream and not about just opening up a new business in town. So just from a freelance perspective, I see some shaking heads. You know, you can really, I think it makes you a better freelancer when you can take a look at something that is so common, so overdone, something that's in every single magazine across the country, and pull yourself out of that and kind of figure out what makes you the best writer for this story. So that's kind of what I look for as an editor of a publication, just like a general lifestyle magazine. And you know, if anybody has any interest in freelancing for our magazine, I am very involved in the editing process. So it's not really a submission and then, you know, maybe you'll hear from me, maybe you won't. I go through extensive edits on every article, and I'll actually send you back the final version before it goes to print, and I'll put in comments about, especially before a deadline, I'll say, you know, I kind of wish you could go back, maybe ask this person a few more questions, maybe like, you know, why are they here? Why did they move to Missoula? That's kind of an interesting thing to know. It's something that they're going to talk to, you know, a new friend in a coffee shop about, and I'm really interested in coffee shop conversations. That's where you get to know people. And I think that our readers really enjoy getting to know people that way too. It's so Missoula. We all want to know what everybody's doing, and for myself personally, I feel like Missoula was kind of the American dream for me. I was working and living in New York City with my husband, and while that's such a big dream for everyone, or a lot of people, it was sort of a death sentence for us. We were coming out of college, and we both wanted to be out west, and when we both got unanswered queries for jobs out here, Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, we both got offers for these really luxurious jobs in New York City, and it was a little bit of a bittersweet moment for us because I'm a big horseback rider. I have a fellow horseback rider here. So those dreams kind of got like squashed a little bit, and you see yourself sitting at a desk for 60, 70, maybe 80 hours a week, and you're wondering like, oh my gosh, is all this creativity going to be stifled? What kind of, you know, tornado am I going to get wrapped up in here? But I'm kind of excited that that was my journey, because working at a literary agency in New York kind of gave me insight to a lot of the things that like maybe a lot of you are in the room wanting to know. It's, you know, how to get an agent. What are they looking for? Do you have to have like this pristine novel to submit to somebody? Or even, I mean, they even publish magazine articles, you know, The Atlantic, all these different publications. A lot of those writers already have agents, and I feel like starting as a writer and having something published that people are sharing on the internet or maybe buying at Barnes & Noble, we're not always sure of like what that bridge looks like. So I kind of have a little bit of background experience in that, and it's really helped me because when I signed up for this panel, it was 2-3 months ago, I had no idea that I'd be talking about what I'm about to talk about right now, but I'm super excited that you all are in the room, and this is my first time sort of publicly telling people, so it's exciting. So in all this practice of me including myself in these stories and my history and my personal experiences, I've sort of been developing this craft of not only journalism, but craft in writing memoir without my knowing about it. And I'm like, oh, I'm on it. Like, I know what I'm writing, but there's something going on in the background there. So I had written this story just on my own, and I'm like, you know, I haven't been writing as much. That's kind of happens when you become a freelance writer, and then maybe you move up to editor because that's what you want to do, that's what your career is going, but you also want to make sure you're honing in on your own craft as well, and you write less when you edit more. So I wrote this story and I submitted it to the Washington Post, New York Times, because I was like, I don't have time for all the little stuff, I'm going big or I'm going home. So this all just happened around Labor Day weekend. And, a weekend when people are done with the summer of work and they want to just relax with their families. And I had not heard back from the New York Times, but I did hear back from the Washington Post. And they said, we really love this story. It's 1,900 words. We can only publish 800 of them. So as an editor, I'm thinking, that's okay. I can do this. Editing is my life. Let's get this thing down. Let's publish this thing. Let's get it out. And it didn't quite go like that, but I'm super grateful. So this gracious editor decided to take on the story. He needs to kind of have something of substance that meets all the criteria and then give it to his department, and they need to have a unanimous yes to push it up and publish it. So he and I worked together on several drafts, and it's sort of a double narrative between losing my father and dealing with loss and having adopted a wild Mustang last year. So I kind of talk about the BLM and what's happening, which is kind of a hot button national issue right now. And he didn't want, which I really appreciate in an editor, and I think everybody in this room should know if that's like the kind of route that you want to go down. All editors want to do your story justice. Like if you have, that's kind of why I named this panel Having Something to Say, because I remember a really good novelist friend of mine is Dean Cacopoulos. I don't know if anybody in this room has read him before, but highly recommend My American Unhappiness. He was one of my early author loves, and he actually spoke at this festival, I think in 2010 or 2011. And he told me in an Iowa writer workshop, everything changes when you have something to say. And I think writing journalistically or writing, on a novel, say you've been working on a novel for 10 years and you're like, well, it's just for me, or I just blog, or I do this. One day you're going to wake up and realize that there's something different about that day, that you have something to say that maybe needs to be heard by more than just you or your kids or your husband. And I know for sure my husband is like, yes, please let somebody else read it. He hears everything. So I was really grateful that I had all that push. And coming back to the article, this editor really didn't want, taking an article that's 1,900 words and whittling it down to 800 is a feat in itself. It's almost harder than actually just writing the 1,900 words and just being like, oh, I can't do anything with it, just take it. And he didn't want to see my dad's story and like that story of loss get taken out, when logistically for the Washington Post it needed to be taken out. So this is the next, I was talking about the bridge between like writing and then getting something published. The next plank in that bridge is that uncomfortable word for, I'm sure, a lot of us in the room, like, I am a writer. You have to claim, even if it's just for yourself, like, yes, I am a writer, I am an author. And I kind of laid that next plank for myself and said, well, I actually have a book in progress, so I'm not too worried about taking out that narrative. And that really spiked his attention. Or it could not have. So like either way, you're really at no loss. Your story is already being looked at an editor, just run with it. But it doesn't hurt to kind of put that out there if you do have enough passion and enough hard work put into it. You might as well put that out there for yourself. It's another resume. So that little piece of throwing myself out there kind of led to him being super excited and kind of like having that conversation take a dual narrative. he was super excited about me being able to take those portions out of the article so it could work for the Washington Post. But then also, he took this strange investment in making sure that I followed that pursuit of a book. So over Labor Day weekend, he had sent my long story to his wife, or like let her read it while they were on vacation, and then his wife sent it to her literary agent, who freaked out over it and then got in touch with me. And it's Labor Day Monday, I'm home relaxing, and I'm like, what is going on? So, it could really just happen that fast, and you're thinking about everything, and you're trying to do your story justice and making sure that all these projects all of a sudden are taking on a life of their own without your knowing about it. And they're growing legs and living in these other people's inboxes. And I had this little, a flicker in my chest that was like, okay, another dilemma that maybe a lot of people aren't faced with is, I used to work for this literary agency in New York, and they don't know about this story. And I sort of felt like they're my family in a way, and the other side of that coin is you don't want anybody to do you any favors, because you want your work to be able to, you don't want to have a book out there, or it probably wouldn't even be a book if it was based on favors, but you don't want to have any work out there that feels like I couldn't have done this without a village of people that I knew. You want to be able to look at it and say, so many different people loved this, and that's why it's here. So I decided to maybe let this journey kind of go on its own, and let's see what happens with this other agent. And I'm going to bed one night, and I'm just like, I have got to tell this literary agency. So I took another leap there and told this agent where I used to work about everything that had happened, and she's like, Chelsea, send me everything. So I sent her my 150-page scrapbook and probably 50 pages of writing that I was okay with anyone else reading, but definitely not the 150 pages that was saved for only that person. And she read the entire thing on Labor Day, which still baffles me. And she said, I think we can get together and do a proposal and go out with this. So that's kind of where I'm at today. And I just want to give every freelancer in here kind of hope that just because you're at home blogging and maybe you want to make a little extra money on the side, because who doesn't? Freelancing, you get to do something that you love, you get to practice your craft, and you get to get a paycheck. I mean, that's kind of how I got started in this. You're only going to get out what you put in. So if you want to be the next New York Times bestseller, just go for it. Go for it. You just got to face a lot of rejection. I've sent dozens of things off to places that never got picked up. I didn't even get a rejection slip. So I guess I'm not even quite sure what that means. They didn't get back to me. It passed through. It just passed through like dust. So that's going to happen a lot, but I feel like when you finally get to a subject that you're super passionate about, whether it's a memoir or you have a certain story you want to tell, even if you're not quite sure that you're comfortable with your vulnerability in that way, I feel like it's important just to write it, just to get it out on the page, because at the end of the day, it might just be for you, but maybe you'll be so comfortable with it after working on it for years that you're okay with sharing it with other people. And I feel like from freelance writing to being a novelist, we're all here to share in the human experience. So that's kind of where it all stems from. And I want to open it up so we can kind of interact, and I can answer questions for freelancers or people that are journeying to a book, or whatever your story is. I want to help and answer any questions that you may have. So anybody have any thoughts or anything that they're working on or anything? Comments, questions, concerns? Sure.
I'm wondering, when you do your freelance assignment and you send in the first draft to the editor, excuse me, and they come back with some questions and changes and suggestions. I know the best thing is to put your trust in that editor because they have that job for a reason.
Yes.
Sometimes I wonder, when do you want to fight for your original vision, and when do you know when to pull back?
Yep, for sure. So I kind of feel like I went through that with the editor of Washington Post a little bit. I'm not sure if every editor is as careful as he was. I think he was just like super devoted to making sure that it was something that I was proud of. But I do think that every editor will always send you the final product or what they believe to be the final product, and it's open for your approval or denial. And I think it's super important, even if it means that they can't take it at that point because you want to stay true to what you're saying, or maybe they've manipulated your things so badly that, you know, sort of like in my case, it was a bad judgment call for me to send something so narrative to the Washington Post, which isn't very narrative, it's very newsy. So I kind of knew that that was probably going to happen, that they were going to just like squish it and, you know, malform it to something that didn't look anything like what I sent in. And I'm sort of grateful like how the whole thing unraveled anyway, but in hindsight, if all roads came to an end there, I would have chosen to keep it the way that I wanted it to, because the last version of it was not actually going to get published. And that's sort of what happened. So we chose to, working with an agent now, she was like, you know, let's retract that, thank him for everything that he's done, and they're going to submit it to more appropriate places. So because like the version that it started out as was very narrative, and the version that it ended up as was pretty much lifeless in my opinion. And I feel like, you know, you're the owner of that material. So I don't think it's ever wrong to say this isn't really what I expected and move on. There's so many publications out there, so many, and it will find a home for sure. Yeah. Okay.
Could you talk a little bit about writing a proposal and I guess kind of shopping around your work that way?
Yes, I'd love if anyone could tell me about that. Writing a proposal, I've actually written people's proposals before at my literary agency job, which was so much easier when it's not your work. So much easier. Oh my God, you have just 20/20 vision when you're looking at somebody's work and you're looking at it from an editor perspective. You know exactly which sections. I mean, I've circled whole pages. No, done, get rid of it. And then you look at your own work and you're just like, how do I whittle down 150 pages to this outline per se? And, you know, I guess my background kind of comes from knowing that a proposal doesn't always look like one thing. I suggest a proposal not being anything less than 50 pages. I think it's super important to have an outline. If you're somebody who's really structured, I would even break it down by chapter. I would have a table of contents as your first page, and I would break it down by, you know, section or chapters, chapter 1, and then have a example of that chapter. It doesn't need to be necessarily narrative and like how you would actually tell your story, but you can actually say like on that page, you know, chapter 1, I'll be speaking about da 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 da, and then chapter 2, same deal. And then maybe if you have 15 chapters, I would have 5 of those be actual excerpts. That's where you like, you know, hit pen to paper, keyboard, whatever, write your heart out. You know, show them. They want to have a sample of your work. And if it's too short, they're going to want more in kind of a bad way, because they're not going to have a clear idea of what the whole thing is going to look like. So personally, I'm taking the outline, the very structured outline, and I'm doing, since mine kind of follows a double narrative, I'll be taking every other chapter is going to be an excerpt. So they're like, well, wait, what happened there? And then they'll get a little bit. So you got to kind of hold back the reins a little bit. Does that help answer your question? Okay. Sure.
Do you write the whole chapter or just?
No. I have written, I'd say, typed pages, 4 to 5 pages. And I don't know if that's going to be maybe all it is for some of those chapters, or if it's going to be, 5 pages on top of that.
Is it the beginning, or do you just pull something?
One of mine is the beginning, yes. That's kind of just how I started the book. But yeah, I think anything, even if it just, you wake up one morning and you're like, oh, that thing happened, and I think that's super important to put in there, but you're not sure how it kind of fits in, just write it anyway.
Do you include your outline as well?
Yeah.
And your
Definitely.
comments?
Yep, yeah. I would organize any kind of outline that you have, and if you're not somebody who has like a very structured vision of the book, like chapter 1, we're gonna do this, chapter 2, maybe there's gonna be different parts. If you don't have that, I would suggest having probably about a 4 or 5 page analysis of what you envision the whole work looking like.
More of a conceptual thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And I've seen proposals that have sold that way as well. So it doesn't always look like what, it's like writing. It's not always going to look the same for everybody. So, yeah.
Thanks. So if it's still how it is, the journalism program here to get an MFA, it's just environmental studies.
Oh,
and I just finished a book that's travel memoir.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Congrats. Oh, that's such a
It took,
feat.
like 4 years.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty good time, I feel like.
Really?
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I just came from panels yesterday where people were working on them from 7 to like 12 years.
Okay.
So you're like getting it done.
Okay.
Yeah, for
I was
sure.
considering an MFA in creative writing to like bang out the second one because it's a series.
Yep.
And freelancing on the side to have
Gotcha.
money. But I am kind of curious about journalism, so I was going to
Yeah.
maybe take some journalism classes.
Okay.
But then I'm like, with the finished book, when all I really want to do is just publish that series,
Yeah.
what would be pros and cons of getting an MFA?
So I was in the same dilemma as you. When I moved out here, I didn't have a job, and I was kind of like, I don't know what to do. All I know is I'm going to need to make money at some point soon. So, but I've been very, very stubborn ever since graduating high school about having time to write. I don't want to sound like too terrible, but I won't accept the 9-to-5 job anymore. That was something I knew about myself after graduating college and going through the 80-hour work weeks in New York City. When I moved out to Montana, I knew that I would never have that kind of job again. And that meant working on ranches, it meant working at coffee shops, it meant working at bookstores, $8 to $10 an hour. It was whatever I needed to do to get by. But I guess where I kind of made the decision to not get my MFA, even though I think it's such a good idea, if you have the time and the money and financial and all that to go for it, I would definitely recommend it. I feel like the MFA sets you up structurally for immersing yourself in craft and time. You don't have to worry about running to a job every day, and you're so in that environment all the time that it has no choice but to breed success for your craft. What you do with it from there is, definitely up to you. But if you have the opportunity to do it and you feel like that's the right decision, I would totally go for it. I don't have anything bad to say about MFAs. But I felt like I just needed more material to write about. I feel like I needed more life experience, honestly, even though that was sort of a painful realization. Everybody who graduates from college, whether it's a bachelor or MFA, you're like, I just want to write a book. Come on, where are the ideas? I don't know what to write about. Or even if you do and you get 100 pages in, you're like, no one wants to read this. I don't know what I'm talking about. But, once you have a story, something to say, that's when, I just feel like you could be in an MFA or you could be working at a coffee shop, and that thing is going to grow a life of its own, doesn't it?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right.
I was a writer for the Washington Post, and I think she was a freelance writer because she was based in Jackson Hole,
Okay.
close to New York City.
Yeah.
And she wrote a huge article about how wonderful Missoula is.
Oh, nice. I'll have to look that up for sure.
Her boyfriend works here, so she comes here all the time.
Oh, how fun.
And ironically, from Jackson Hole, which is
swarming with tourists, and she said, "Oh, Missoula is so great because you don't see any tourists."
Yeah. I love Missoula. I feel so lucky to be just editor of this magazine and then kind of like exploring the Flathead territory too. So it's such a great place to be. So I'm extremely biased, but
What's
I
the
love
name of the
Missoula.
magazine here?
Missoula Valley Lifestyle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I've got business cards up here if anybody wants to take a look through the magazine. There are stories about everyday businesses and people, but you'll see just from my freelancers that I have how we kind of like try to get past this press release type of writing. I mentioned in the description of this panel, like writing for deadline. Those BuzzFeed articles and stuff like that. I know they're like kind of bait or clickbait or whatever they call it today, but I really, really like to be loyal to like narrative quality writing. So yeah, I try to make that exist at all costs. Well, I know we're like a little bit early today, but that's kind of all I have planned for you guys. And thank you so much for all your questions. They were so lovely. Anybody have anything else to share or what they're working on? I'm here to stay too if anybody wants to like do a one-on-one type deal.
I would do it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. That's kind of all I have for today. I'm so sorry to be so short, but kind of just got it all out there. Thank you.